like very much connected with what Jim was talking about. I think from a Buddhist perspective, the issue isn't so much evil, it's confusion. And it's the solidity of that confusion. It's the intensity with which that confusion becomes karmically propelled in an environment of ignorance, where it has no access to that insight that allows you to endure that deficient emptiness and not act. I think from a Buddhist perspective, in particular from the perspective of Tonglen, the difficulty with the term evil is that it ascribes an ontological status to what, in Buddhist terms, is a dependently arisen mere appearance. In other words, Osama bin Laden, from a Buddhist perspective, isn't evil. He's very confused, deeply confused. We could use the Aqua map to look at exactly, what that confusion looks like. But one of the practices that I worked with after 9/11 was including Osama bin Laden in my Tonglen practice. And it seems to me that the type of energy that I'm feeling from you as you ascribe evil to those people that you saw on the Ted Koppel show is that, well, basically I'll put it back to you this way. I think it would be an interesting inquiry for you to look at what happens to your Tonglen practice the moment you ascribe evil, the moment you cross that line and you say, they're no longer confused, they're actually evil. Is there a slight separation that's created in your own heart between that object? Do you solidify? Do you create a kind of theistic bubble within which that becomes an object, where they become other?
So I'd say first, thank you so much for the question. And whenever I talk about this, or whenever a kind of Judeo-Christian teacher talks about this, right, there's always a great Buddhist teacher in the room who raises this issue, because that's a real conversation. Right? There actually are two axial frameworks. There are two ways of talking about this, which I think at their root aren't that different. At their root, they're not that different. But I think what they do is they hold the paradox differently. That is to say, let me kind of say it like this. Right? I think it's what Ken was talking about when he said, if you meet Hitler, blow his brains out with a smile. Right? That is to say, let me make it more personal. In other words, in the paradox, we need at a certain level of consciousness to be able to say, this is wrong. That's a level of consciousness. We call it in Kabbalah the level of Havdalah, of distinction. And I need to hold that level, and I never want to ever lose that level entirely. I'll always transcend and include, but I'll never transcend and exclude. That is to say, and therefore, that's the only way I can actually train myself. I can train my children. I can create a world, right, in which the most good happens. Okay. Then I move up a level, which from Havdalah, right, which is separation, to Hamtaka, which is sweetness. And at the sweetness level, I say, why'd you call that evil? That's not evil. It's just confusion. Right? Now, both of those levels exist, and I was trying to reflect both of them. Right? And the Kabbalistic move is to refuse to accept Hamtaka, sweetness, that level of consciousness, without Havdalah, separation, and to actually demand that they be held together. And the kind of argument is that if I lose either one of them, there's attendant dangers on each side. So for example, just to make it again very, very, very real, when I'm in Israel and I go visit, which I do, right, the person who's responsible for murdering my student, right, I go with an open heart. And I want them in prison, right, very clearly. Right? And I go with an open heart. Right? They're both true. They're both true. And I don't want to easily let go of either side. I think kind of Judeo-Christian moment by itself sometimes gets lost in one side. Certainly it's exoteric practice. And if I could be just, chutzpah, audacious, I sometimes feel, and I'm probably wrong, but in my outside reading of the East, I feel like it sometimes gets lost on the other side. And maybe kind of in the symphony, we need to always remind each other. Right? But certainly within my tradition, we hold those together.
Well, and Patrick can speak to that. The Zen master would hit you in the head with a stick right now. In other words, that's the relative side.
Right.
And it gets lost in the American translation of the
Right.
Eastern version.
Right.
That classically, both in East and West, is what's called the two truths doctrine, and it's very important to remember both of them. Absolute truth is that fundamental where we literally are all the great perfection. And that's fundamentally what Tong Lin helps to establish you at that fundamental level of exchanging self for other, so that you see that there's one self, capital S. But that's not a theory, that's that non-seeking mind that's
Right.
arising in you whenever you get in touch with the non-grasping mind right now. And Tong Lin is a way to relate those finite things that run into each other and hurt to that ever-present ground of great perfection that is identical
Right.
in all of them. Not identical as a theory, but as this texture of this moment right now. And that's absolute truth. And then relative truth is there's good and evil. There are good things and there are bad things in the world. They are equally the great perfection. But if you meet Hitler, blow his brains out. Now, what you can't do as you grow through egocentric to ethnocentric to world-centric to cosmocentric is it's not that you don't make those distinctions of there are things that are good and evil, it's that you hold them in the great perfection. And indeed, getting lost on one side or the other is a problem. Charles Manson, the Tate murderer, who was a horrifying mass murderer, had a saying, if all is one, nothing is wrong. And it's a good way to confuse relative and absolute truth. That's a
Right.
perfect prescription for evil, is to confuse those two. And he studied mysticism. He said, West, if all,
Right.
all is one, nothing is wrong. No, everything is one, and there are some things that are wrong. But obviously, it's a matter of growth until you have to be able to take all the perspectives that very much like Fred was describing. And as you see all those perspectives, then it does, in a sense, soften the kinds of judgments you make. But it wouldn't stop Fred from stopping the Holocaust. I mean, he wouldn't sit there and go, gosh, I don't know, they're all humans, and I'll go ahead and let some of them fry some of them. I guess that's okay. I don't think that's what he was saying. But what happens when you take all these perspectives is it reminds you of that one type of awareness that isn't a perspective, and that's pure awareness.
Right.
It's arising as your own non-grasping, non-seeking mind. And then within that suchness, these perspectives arise. And it's just in the nature of the finite world that some of them really are not nice, and that those have to be dealt with. And so that keeping both of those in
Right.
mind
Holding
absolutely
it's
important.
hugely
on both sides.
that's been that's just the frame that's running through it, the voices in the room. That's kind of holding them both. I mean, the way we would say it in the tradition, in the mystical tradition, is just give just a wonderful funny thing. Let's be like, lighten up here for a second, right? Yom Kippur, day of Kippur. That's the day of sin and punishment, good and evil. But that's the number 2 day. The highest day in the mystical year is Purim. So Yom Kippur is the day that's like Purim. But Purim is the highest day. Happens 1 day a year. You get drunk, but holy drunk, sacred drunk. And the idea is you have to get to a place, Ad lo yada ben Arur Haman levaruch Mordechai. You can't tell the difference between Haman, who is cursed, and Mordechai, who is blessed. Right? They merge in this higher unity. Right? Now, we can't do Purim all year. Right? Can't hold that all year, but we need to access Purim energy to invest the paradox in everything we do, or we get lost on the other side.
You are listening to www.integralnaked.org.